Joining me today is an author, the political editor of townhall.com, and a Fox News contributor, Guy Benson. Welcome to the Rubin Report.
Thanks for having me. This is great.
I am looking forward to talking to you, but we've got to say first, Fox News contributor, a certain amount of people are going to hate you already.
Right out of the gate.
What do you do with that kind of information?
Well, I think it's interesting how some people use labels as a substitute for argument. So I'll make a point on Twitter, for example, and someone on the left will check my bio and just respond, "Oh, well, Fox News contributor," as if that means anything, as if that's a response to anything that I've actually argued. And I'll say, "Good point." You know, like, where are you going with that? And usually they sort of scuttle off somewhere. But I'm very happy to work there. I've been proud to work there for 4 years. It's a great platform. And one thing that sometimes people ask me about it is, you know, there's elements that are very pro-Trump and others that aren't, and are you ever told or encouraged to think something or say something on the air? And the answer, hand to heart, is no, never, which I value greatly. And I think if that were different, I would probably not want to stick around, and that's never happened. Full editorial independence, which is, I think, crucial for a thriving network, and I've been afforded that. Yeah,
and I will back you on that much. I haven't done as much Fox's stuff as you have, but I had been on O'Reilly, I've done Tucker, I've done Gutfeld. They let you go on and say whatever you want, and the chips will fall where they may, but in terms of editing, you know, a lot of this stuff is live, and it kind of is what it is. But people just have a feeling that somehow there's something evil happening.
Or that there's an editorial line that we somehow get a memo at the beginning of every day. Here's what we think about this today. I mean, it's ludicrous. And just look at the people. I think a lot of the critics of Fox don't watch Fox. They see short clips of it on The Daily Show or on Samantha Bee or whatever, highlighting a particularly preposterous moment. And then they say, well, it must be that 24/7, and that's not how it is. And sometimes when people are really skeptical or cynical about the network, I'll encourage them to watch Bret Baier's show, Special Report, and I say, give that a shot for a week. Watch 2 or 3 episodes and then come back to me and let me know if you have the exact same perception of Fox News.
Do they ever do it? Do they ever
Very
actually do it?
rarely.
Because he's pretty center, that guy.
Yeah, sometimes they do, and they're like, all right, this is a legit show. And I'm like, okay, this is progress.
That's a small amount of progress.
Thank you for watching.
There. Yeah. All right. So we're going to talk a lot about your book, Ended Discussion. We met briefly about 2 years ago in at the after party at Real Time with Bill Maher, and the hardcover had come out. The soft cover, which we have right here, just came out. So before we get into the book, though, you're gay, and
are we breaking this news on the Rubin Report?
It says it right there.
Does it? Well, the card can't be wrong.
Yeah, I mean, this is a blue card with typing on it.
Yeah, on televisions or whatever. You know,
wherever. We're sending this out to something.
Yes.
You're gay and you're a Republican.
Yeah, well,
I just dropped my cards because of that. How could this possibly be?
I would consider myself more of a conservative than a Republican.
Okay.
I tend to vote Republican because the Democratic Party, to me, is a completely inhospitable place for me based on my beliefs and my worldview. But the Republican Party, frustrates me deeply on a frequent basis. So I feel like I'm less attached to the R label than I am to the conservative one.
So let's do that part first, actually. Then, so tell me, what does being a conservative mean to you? Then we'll get to the gay stuff.
Great. To me, it just means that I believe fundamentally that the government, especially the federal government, isn't particularly good at doing very many things at all, and they do too many things, and they do them badly at great expense to all of us. And I think they should do fewer things, do them better, and preferably the things that they are required to do under the Constitution, and not a constantly expanding array of tasks that they accumulate, and it costs a lot of us a lot of money. So a small government conservative is sort of where I come from. Foreign policy, I'm somewhere in the middle of the party or the conservative movement. I'm not a hardcore hawk, but I'm not a non-interventionalist either, or a non-interventionist. And then on social issues, it's just a complete mixed bag. It's hard to pin me down. Pro-gay marriage, pro-life, sort of all over the map. And given that panoply of issues, and I look at where the parties stand, you know, or where the movements are in this country, I do agree with the left on some things, but it's just outweighed by the right. On most issues, I lean to the right, and therefore I tend to vote Republican.
Yeah. So by conventional thinking, though, people would say, wait a minute, you can't be a gay conservative. How could you have fought for gay marriage, for example, from a conservative perspective? How do you answer something like that?
I just think it's a completely false premise. The idea that someone has to prioritize their politics based on their identity, I think, is a toxic, corrosive, lefty construct that I just completely reject. Right? If I wanted to be a gay person who's against gay marriage, I have every right to think that way. I happen to support gay marriage.
Yeah.
I hope to get married, but
And there are some of those that exist, by the way.
yeah, they're out there for sure.
Yeah.
And if that's, let's have that discussion. I'm not going to call you self-hating because you don't support every single one of the agenda items of a political party or a political movement or the LGBT community or whatever it might be. To me, I look at my priorities in terms of the elements on policy that animate me, that I think about the most, that I am concerned about the most. And if I sort of weigh them, it tilts in the rightward direction, which is why I am a conservative. That doesn't mean that I think the Republican Party represents me perfectly or even particularly well on gay rights issues. I also think it's an odd it's an odd vantage point or an odd demand that some people on the left try to make, that if you are a certain way, if you're in a certain column or a category of people, you have to then vote for a certain party or what have you. Would you prefer that there is nobody on the other side of the aisle making arguments to perhaps modernize the platform, for example, the Republican Party, or to introduce the idea that there are gay people that are not all that scary? I mean, in this process of being on the book tour for 2 years and speaking to a lot of conservative audiences, I have been really struck by just the kindness and the sweetness that I've encountered from a lot of traditional conservatives who are not necessarily even on board for gay marriage, but are sort of like, oh, maybe we're sort of rethinking some of this a little bit. One story that comes to mind in particular that I enjoy telling was I was at an event in Denver a year and a half ago maybe, and we were doing a book signing. This was the hardcover back then. And fortunately there was a long line, so people were coming up and they're wanting photos and that sort of thing. And there was this woman who was probably in her 60s, and she approached me and she got the book signed, and I could tell she wanted to say something else. And she didn't know if to say it or how to say it. And finally, she just sort of blurted it out, whispered a little bit. She goes, I have a nephew who's the way you are. And it was just this very cute way of sort of trying to just say, and I love him.
Yeah. And
that was her way of trying to communicate about it and just sort of pat me on the shoulder and say, you're welcome here. And, we've got your back. And there's been some of that, and frankly, my favorite response that I've gotten from conservatives since I came out in the book, actually, 2 years ago.
So the timing was all, you did this sort of in lockstep.
Well, and I can explain that in a second, but I was just going to say my favorite response has been ambivalence. People just being like, noted, moving on, right? That's the best response to me, because the reason that I didn't come out publicly sooner is because I felt like it was no one's business. Mm-hmm. This is my personal life. Anyone who knew me closely, my family, my friends, my colleagues, they all knew.
Yeah.
I just wasn't publicly gay because I didn't want to pigeonhole myself right out of the gate in my career as the gay whatever.
Yeah.
I wanted people to start to read my work, see me on TV, and get a sense of the content of what I put out, rather than viewing me through an identity lens immediately. But because we delve into some of these issues, gay rights and religious liberty and so on, in an entire chapter of the book entitled Bake Me a Cake, Bigots, I felt like at that point, if I'm going to write 10,000 words on an issue, I should probably disclose, just journalistically, that I'm gay. So I did it in a footnote in the book, and I felt it was the right time for the right reason.
Yeah. So when you go on the tour and you're meeting now these conservatives and you're doing book signings and things like that, and most of them don't care, do you think that's the best way to actually change people's minds on gay marriage? Is that all you did? You put in a footnote. Okay, now here I am. Let's go ahead. Did you get any blowback?
A little bit, but it was
Like
marginal.
from legit people? I mean, maybe from some haters on Twitter, but was there any, because I get this all the time, because I think we're going to agree on the cake. I'm pretty sure we agree on the gay cake thing. And I'll say, well, people say to me, well, see, you're tolerating these Republicans who hated you all these years. And I'm like, well, they've changed a lot, actually.
Yeah. There's been a huge sea change. I also don't accept that someone having a political disagreement or not wanting to participate in a gay wedding equates to hating me. So I try to be more generous in spirit on that sort of thing. But
you're also allowed to hate people. I mean, you are. It's kind of uncomfortable.
That's true.
We don't like it. I would rather that
I don't
not,
encourage that.
Yeah, I don't encourage it. I would
Yeah.
rather it not happen. But you are, even for bad reasons, you're allowed to hate. You're not allowed to hurt people.
Right.
Physically, but
Right.
you are allowed to have your own bigoted views. It's just how it is. You know?
But I think,
I'd like to change those views, but
and that's part of, I think, what you do, right? That's just doing the show and reaching out to new, especially younger audiences. They're sort of like, trying to open people's minds in a society where we seem to be trending in the other direction, the wrong direction. But your question reminds me of another stop on the tour. This one was in New Mexico, I believe. And my co-author is Mary Catherine Ham, who's like a very, very dear friend. We're almost like siblings at this point. And she's at CNN now. So we were in Albuquerque, and during the Q&A, we had done our normal spiel about the book, and someone asked her, it had just been, remember the Day Without Women?
Yeah.
Where there was a strike just to show the impact of women in society. So a woman asked her during the session, how did you spend your day without women? And then I think she thought like, I should maybe just ask Guy anyway because I don't want to only ask a question of Mary Catherine. So Mary Catherine gave this great answer about the day without women, and she was very charming and very funny. And then she tossed it to me. She's like, well, what did you do with your day without women? I'm like, that's sort of every day for me, am I right? And in my mind, I was like, is this a joke that I should make? Like, this is just a straight up self-deprecating gay joke in front of an older conservative audience. Got a huge laugh, sort of punctured any awkwardness about that. And it was like, done.
Yeah.
Most people don't care, which is definitely progress.
And that's also why, just to have you here and have this conversation, people don't get this kind of conversation too often between two gay people that come from a slightly different political perspective.
Right.
But I know when I've had Milo here, who, comes from a completely other political perspective.
Has he been in this chair?
He's been in that it wasn't in this room, but he's been in that very chair.
Okay.
Which will now taint you, I'm sure, in some way that you'll never be able to, come back from.
I'm going to leave that one alone.
But point being that that when we've talked, even though we come from things from a different perspective also, that it's refreshing for people to hear gay people talk about issues that aren't just about fashion or whatever the things that Bravo's telling you all gay people should care about.
I mean, so this is actually a story that I've never told, but when in the process, and like every gay person has gone through the process of coming out, and like the first step is coming out to yourself, right? And then you sort of, for me, I expanded the circle of trust, so to speak. And one of the conversations that I was most dreading was with a very close group of guy friends from college. Went to Northwestern, and we were all at a bachelor party weekend in Montreal for one of our buddies was getting married, and I just sort of felt this was the time. We were all together.
Yeah.
So I told them, and they sort of were shocked, and they interrogated me for an hour in the hotel, like, what do you mean? And I could sort of get the sense from the line of questioning a little bit. They were like, so the person that we've gotten to know, like, is that all real or all fake or what's going on? I'm like, no, like, I'm the conservative Christian sports fan that you know.
Yeah.
I just happen to like dudes. Like, that's the only thing that's different, because there is this stereotype of what we are supposed to like or dislike, and as I have sort of grown into being gay, you start to meet more gay people, and you're just sort of like, oh, these stereotypes
are beyond.
Yeah, they're silly. Some of them are fair, but a lot of them are silly. And I think now that we're in a more tolerant and open society, gay people, LGBTQ people come in all shapes and sizes, and I'm hoping that's becoming not just more mainstream for average America, but also within the gay club.
Yeah.
There's a little bit more openness to some diversity. At least that's my aspiration here.
Interesting, because my next question was sort of going to be the reverse of that, which is that right now I see the gay community, I see two things happening, and they're happening at the exact same time, sort of in parallel with each other. One, I see a community that used to be really irreverent and fun and over the top and drag queens and any politically incorrect joke and all that. I see that starting to crumble because of some of the stuff that you talk about in this book about the political correctness now steeping in. So the people who used to be the outsiders are now sort of the insiders and they're becoming politically correct. But then I also, at the same time, I see because of that, that I see a certain amount of gay people are starting to shift away from leftism because they're going, wait a minute, this isn't fun anymore or something. Like they've taken away something very special that the gay community had. Do you see that?
Yeah, although I think probably some of it is just a backlash to political correctness, and that's by no means exclusive to the gay community, right? I think part of the reason we have the president that we have is because people got so tired of this stifling, weaponized political correctness from the left that eventually a lot of people on the right said, we've had enough. If they're going to bully us culturally endlessly, we're going to go hire our own bully. And he's orange, and we're going to hire him, and that's who we have. I think a lot of this is a cultural backlash, and that of course extends to a certain number of gay people as well. And there's also just lots of good reasons to be a conservative if you're a taxpayer. I don't care what your sexual orientation is. If you think the government is taking too much of the money that you earn, if you think the military should be strong and defeat our enemies, if you believe, like I do, in the pro-life cause, there's lots of different reasons why someone can end up within the conservative movement. I do think that for people who are LGBT, the Republican Party's platform and a lot of their rhetoric, especially in the past, has been a barrier to entry, which I completely understand. I think the rhetoric and the toleration is getting better. It's by no means perfect, but it's getting better, and I think it's also a generational shift in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I mean, interestingly, Trump is the first president that ever came in on a first term basically being for pro-gay marriage, right? I mean,
or
even Obama the first time was.
Care.
He just doesn't care. I mean, Peter Thiel spoke at the convention. Trump, the week before the election, was on stage with a rainbow flag. Again, I have no idea what he thinks about gay people. I just don't think he thinks it's an issue, and I think that has sort of just trickled down to people where they're just like, big damn whoop.
Yeah, I mean, he's done some things as president that I know have really inflamed the gay community. But overall, I think it is, and as you know, I'm not a huge fan of the president all the time. I try to be fair to him. And one of the things that I think you have to say is, indisputably, he's the most pro-LGBT Republican president ever. It's not even close. And the fact that he had a gay supporter on stage at the RNC talking about being gay and being proud of being gay and getting a standing ovation.
Get a standing ovation.
That's unheard of, even rewinding the clock 4, 5, 10 years for sure. So, and he's asked about gay marriage. He's like, I'm fine with it. And if you look at public polling, there's been heavy movement on same-sex marriage in terms of public opinion, particularly among self-identified Republicans. And I do think that probably Trump has helped give some people sort of a mental permission slip to be like, well, we like Trump and he doesn't seem to care about this. Maybe we've got bigger fish to fry. Maybe I'm okay with this now.
So do you think the anti-gay stuff for the Republicans, we can sort of parse down where it eventually came from, and did Karl Rove use it as a wedge issue with George W. Bush or any of that stuff, but that there was an odd alliance between the Christian conservatives that were going to be socially conservative versus the small government Republicans, and I sense you're sort of both of those, but that alliance didn't fully make sense because Republicans should have, I think, they could have taken a moral stance on how government should operate and said, well, we shouldn't be involved in this, in how two people want to, go about a private relationship.
Yeah, it's part of the coalition,
they just got crushed into this thing that here we are.
And I think the label of socially conservative is a tricky one, especially for our generation and younger people, because if you look at a lot of the public polling data, and we talk about this in End of Discussion, throughout much of the modern era of American punditry, people talk about social issues, they're really talking about two. They're talking about abortion and gay rights. And there's been this lazy assumption that they're a package deal. And people who you can predict what someone will believe about one issue based on what they believe about the other.
Yeah. Wait, let me pause you there for a second, because I'm pro-gay marriage, obviously. Not only am I pro-gay marriage, I married a dude that's
very pro.
That's very pro.
You are really on the record.
Very, very pro. But I am pro-choice, begrudgingly, as I say every time. And you are pro-gay marriage, not married, so we'll see if you really put it into action. but you're pro-life. But that's the point. So it doesn't always work.
And if you look at the polling data for younger people, we have moved heavily to the left or the libertarian direction on gay rights, but are really the most pro-life generation aside from senior citizens. We are more pro-life than Xers, we are more pro-life than boomers. And so these are not a package deal. They're not linked together. And I think, I've thought a lot about this, and I think some of it comes down to the argument about fairness and people's rights. I think the right, or the anti-gay marriage right, really got its clock cleaned when it came to explain to people why gay marriage is really a problem. Who is that harming? Go. And the arguments are weak. And I used to believe it because I was sort of a lockstep conservative. I checked all the boxes. And then you start, in college I started to think critically about stuff. I'm like, okay, well, here I am making these arguments and they suck. These arguments really suck. Like, I know they suck, I'm gonna keep making them, and then it's sort of like, all right, I have to abandon them.
Yeah.
There isn't a concrete victim to gay marriage that is persuasive to the American people. Whereas on abortion, I think you can make an ethical, scientific, moral case that there is clearly a wronged victim party in abortion, that people are willing to listen to that and at least think about it. Whereas with gay marriage, they're like, well, my brother's gay, my friend is gay, my cousin's a lesbian, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
So I think that's it's the paradigm of human rights that I think makes these issues diverge for a lot of young people.
Yeah, so my audience knows that as we air this, I am off the grid completely. So this isn't airing, this is airing a couple weeks after I've been gone. So I'm trying not to do too much topical stuff with you. But as we're taping this right now, we're in the middle of this thing with Trump's ban on trans people in the military. I think because we're both gay, that people probably want to get some answers out of us. And I always think it's kind of funny, when they put these letters together, LGBT, I have no more inherent knowledge of what it's like to be a trans person than a straight person, but does by default. So first, do you agree with that premise, that you as a gay person don't have any sort of innate knowledge of trans issues just on its face? Yes.
Although the one thing I would push back on is there's probably a little bit more empathy, because I think I think there's a lot of people in America who really have trouble wrapping their mind around same-sex attraction generally. It's just not something that they've ever experienced. They're like, that's just, I don't understand how someone could be like that. I think that's also true for even more people when it comes to trans folks. And so that's where the empathy, I think, for me exists, even though I am by no stretch an expert. I'm not even sure if I'm getting the pronouns right. There's so many rules. Like, and we actually get into it. We have a little subsection called transgressions, where we go through how speaking incorrectly with the wrong terms or problematically got people like, Katie Couric in trouble, and then Dan Savage in trouble, and then to top it all off, RuPaul got in trouble. I'm like, we are through the freaking looking glass if RuPaul is now transphobic or whatever, the epithet is. And I don't think sometimes the trans community or the LGBT community does itself a great service by getting reflexively offended by people using words or asking questions, just trying to figure things out and learn.
Yeah, and well, that sort of hysteria and that sort of then lack of sense of humor too is also goes to what I was saying before about why I see gay people sort of shifting to the center or even to the right now, because they've just kind of had it with that. And it reminds me that when we met 2 years ago, very briefly, as I said, it was at Bill Maher, and even since then, by using a word, he got in trouble by the left, even though no one in their right mind thinks that Bill Maher is a racist.